The Valkyrie Concordants had been watching the galaxy for longer than most species could imagine. They'd found and cataloged 47,000 different alien races across countless star systems. Their methods were simple and refined through thousands of years of practice. First, they'd spot a primitive world. Then they'd wait patiently until that world discovered radio waves and started broadcasting into space. Finally, once the species figured out how to travel faster than light, the Concordants would swoop in with their grand welcome to the galactic community. Earth had been on their list for decades. The Valkyrie scientists had labeled humanity as just another class for emerging civilization. The reports were pretty standard stuff. Humans were aggressive, sure. Territorial, definitely. But nothing special. Nothing they hadn't seen 1,000 times before. The Concordants figured Earth would be just like all the others. Scared at first, then grateful, then eventually falling in line with how things worked in the wider galaxy. Ambassador Thelvor led the first official delegation to Earth. He'd done this job 43 times before with other species. He knew exactly what to expect. The primitive natives would point their outdated weapons at his ships. Their leaders would be nervous, probably making speeches about defending their world. There'd be fear in their eyes mixed with curiosity. It was always the same dance, and Thelvor had the steps memorized. But when his crystalline ships dropped out of faster-than-light travel near Earth, something felt wrong immediately. Instead of panicked military channels or confused government broadcasts, Thelvor received a calm, professional transmission. A human voice welcomed them to the Sol system and politely invited them to specific coordinates near Earth's moon. The tone wasn't fearful or aggressive. It was almost bureaucratic, like they'd been expecting this visit and had already scheduled it between other appointments. Thelvor's sensory tendrils twitched with confusion. This wasn't normal. He exchanged glances with his crew, but they looked just as puzzled. Still, they followed the coordinates. When they arrived at Earth's moon, what they found made Thelvor's 3 hearts skip beats. The moon wasn't just a barren rock. Its surface had been carved up and transformed into something the Valkyrie had never seen from such a young species. Massive construction facilities stretched across craters. Shipyards hummed with activity, building vessels that gleamed with technologies that shouldn't exist yet. Humans in spacesuits moved between structures with the confidence of people who've been working in space for centuries, not just decades. A woman named Director Kelly Grant met them at the main facility. She wore a simple uniform with patches Thelvor didn't recognize and carried herself with quiet authority. No nervousness. No awe at seeing aliens for the first time. She gave them a brief tour of the facility, casually mentioning their defensive fleet and standard patrol routes, like these were everyday topics. She pointed out various ships under construction, rattling off specifications that made the Valkyrie engineers in Thelvor's group exchange worried looks. The Concordants had expected humans to be impressed by their crystalline ships, which were considered beautiful and advanced by galactic standards. Instead, Director Grant glanced at them politely and made a comment about interesting design choices before moving on. It was almost insulting, except she didn't seem to be trying to insult anyone. She just genuinely didn't seem that interested. Thelvor tried to maintain his diplomatic composure, but inside he was reeling. Everything about this first contact was wrong. The humans were too calm, too prepared, too advanced. Where was the shock? Where was the fear? Where were the questions about whether they were alone in the universe? As the delegation prepared to return to their ships with their assessment, Krell, one of the Valkyrie sensor technicians, noticed something that made his scanning equipment go haywire. Deep inside the larger construction bay, partially hidden by scaffolding and work platforms, was something massive. The sensors couldn't get a clear reading, but what they did detect made no sense. The power signatures alone were off the charts. The structural density suggested a ship, but the size was impossible. Thelvor's curiosity finally overcame his diplomatic training. He asked Director Grant directly what they were building in that bay. She paused for just a moment, and Thelvor saw something flicker in her eyes. Not fear or secrecy, but something else. Pride, maybe, or perhaps warning. She turned to look at the construction bay, where work crews swarmed over something so large it disappeared into the shadows. Then she looked back at Thelvor with a slight smile. The kind of smile that made his sensory tendrils coil defensively. "Oh, that?" she said, her tone still casual but with an edge of something harder underneath. "That's just the Colossus. She's not quite finished yet. Give us another few months." The way she said it, so matter-of-fact, made Thelvor's blood run cold. Whatever the Colossus was, Director Grant spoke about it the way someone might mention a guard dog. A very large, very dangerous guard dog. Thelvor suddenly realized that humanity's first contact wasn't going according to plan. Not the Concordance's plan. Anyway, the humans clearly had their own plan, and they'd been working on it for a long time. When Ambassador Thelvor returned to Concordance Council with his report, nobody believed him. A ship 15 kilometers long? That was bigger than most space stations. Powered by controlled antimatter reactions? Species didn't figure that out until they'd been traveling through space for at least 500 years. And weapons that could theoretically crack a moon in half? Absolutely ridiculous. The council members looked at Thelvor like he'd lost his mind. Some suggested his sensors had malfunctioned. Others thought the humans had somehow tricked him with fake readings or holographic projections. A few of the more paranoid members wondered if Thelvor himself had been compromised somehow. But nobody, not a single member of the council, believed that humanity had actually built what he described. The lead counselor, an ancient being named Vextherin, dismissed the report entirely. He'd been alive for 600 years and had overseen the integration of 200 primitive species into the Concordance. He knew how these things worked. Young species didn't build superweapons. They built crude rockets and barely functional laser weapons. They certainly didn't construct vessels that could threaten Concordance authority. So the Council made a decision. They would send a real fleet to Earth. Not a diplomatic mission with a handful of ships, but a proper survey fleet, the kind that made entire star systems surrender without firing a single shot. 200 warships, all state-of-the-art, all crewed by experienced veterans. This fleet had been used 40 times before to handle species that got too ambitious or aggressive. It had never failed. Admiral Corvin, 5, was chosen to lead the expedition. He was a military legend among the Valkyrie, having personally overseen 40 compliance operations. His reputation was built on efficiency and overwhelming force. When Admiral Corvin, 5, showed up, species fell in line. It was that simple. The humans would look at his fleet, realize how outmatched they were, and accept Concordance oversight like everyone else. Corvin, 5, reviewed the human data during the journey to Earth. He read Thelvor's report and chuckled at the wild claims. 15 kilometers. Sure, these humans were clearly bluffing, showing off some half-built station and calling it a warship. He'd seen this before. Primitive species trying to look tougher than they were, hoping to negotiate from a position of strength. It never worked. When the fleet arrived in the Sol system, Corvin, 5, expected immediate chaos. Panic transmissions. Emergency military mobilizations. Maybe even a few brave but foolish humans trying to intercept his ships with their primitive vessels. Instead, he received a calm, almost bored transmission from someone who introduced himself as Fleet Admiral Jack Brennan. The human's message was short and professional. The Concordance fleet was requested to maintain its current position, while Earth prepared appropriate accommodations for diplomatic discussions. Requested, not ordered, but not exactly asking either. The tone was polite but firm, like a teacher telling students to wait in the hallway. Corvin, 5, felt his temper flare. The arrogance was actually impressive. Here was a species that had barely left their own planet, talking to him like they were equals, like his 200 warships were just another appointment on their calendar. Fine, let them have their moment of bravado. Once they saw his fleet maneuver into attack positions, they'd change their tune quickly enough. He prepared his standard speech about the Concordance's superiority and the benefits of integration. He'd given this speech so many times he could recite it in his sleep. But before he could begin transmitting, his sensor's officer made a strange sound. It was hard to describe, something between a gasp and a clicking noise that Valkyrie made when they were terrified. "Admiral," the sensor's officer said, his voice shaking. "The moon, Earth's moon, it's moving." Corvin, 5, thought his officer had made a mistake. Moons didn't move. They orbited, sure, But they didn't just relocate themselves. But when he looked at his own displays, he saw it was true. Earth's moon was shifting position, and it was doing so with precision that suggested massive thrusters or gravitational manipulators, technologies that young species absolutely should not have. Then the sensors started screaming, not figuratively. The concordant sensors were literally overloading with warnings and alerts. A section of the moon's surface was opening up. What they thought was just a crater or geological formation was actually a construction bay, and it was bigger than anything Corvin 5 had ever seen. His weapon systems, which were supposed to be the finest in the galaxy, began automatically calculating firing solutions. These systems have been programmed by the best Concordance engineers to assess threats and prioritize targets. They were designed to stay calm and logical even in the worst combat situations. Every single one of them immediately flagged the same result. Threat level catastrophic. Not high, not severe. Catastrophic. The kind of rating usually reserved for black holes or exploding stars. Something was emerging from the moon. Corvin 5 watched his displays with growing horror as the thing kept coming, and coming, and coming. It was impossibly large, covered in what looked like weapon emplacements, and it radiated power signatures that made his ships look like children's toys. The Colossus emerged from the lunar surface slowly, almost deliberately. It wasn't rushing. It didn't need to. Its mere presence was enough. The human ship dwarfed everything in the system. It made Corvin 5's flagship, which he'd always thought was quite impressive, look like a lifeboat next to an aircraft carrier. For the first time in his 40 compliance operations, Admiral Corvin 5 felt something he'd never experienced before in space. Fear. Pure, primal fear. Because he realized that Thelvor's report hadn't been wrong at all. If anything, it hadn't been dramatic enough. The humans hadn't been bluffing. They'd been warning them. And now the Concordance fleet was staring at a monster that shouldn't exist, built by a species that had just rewritten every rule the galaxy thought it knew. The Colossus didn't fire its weapons. It didn't charge up any devastating laser rays or launch missiles. It just existed there in space, and somehow that was more terrifying than any attack could have been. The ship hung in the void like some ancient monument to human ambition. 15 kilometers of dark metal and unknown technology that made the Concordance survey fleet look like a swarm of insects buzzing around a sleeping giant. Admiral Corvin 5 stared at his displays, trying to make sense of what his sensors were telling him. The hull composition was completely unknown. His databases, which contained information on virtually every material in the known galaxy, came up blank. The weapon arrays covering the Colossus's surface shouldn't function according to conventional physics, and the power signature coming from its core was larger than most planetary defense grids. This single ship was putting out more energy than some entire star systems. His crew sat in stunned silence. These were veterans who'd seen combat, who'd faced down rebellious species and aggressive warlords. They'd never been scared before. But right now, looking at the Colossus, they were all thinking the same thing. They were completely outmatched. Then every screen on every Concordance ship lit up simultaneously. The human communication bypassed their encrypted networks like they weren't even there. Admiral Corvin 5 felt his stomach drop. Their communications were supposed to be unhackable. The Concordance had spent centuries developing their security protocols. The humans had just walked through them like opening an unlocked door. A man's face appeared on the screens. He looked to be in his 50s, with gray hair and sharp eyes that had seen more than a few battles. He wore a simple military uniform with the rank insignia of Fleet Admiral. The name tag read Brennan. "Gentlemen," Fleet Admiral Jack Brennan said, and his voice was calm but carried an unmistakable edge. "Let me be absolutely clear about something. Earth has zero interest in joining your Concordance. We've been watching you for 3 years now. We know how you operate. We know your expansion patterns. We know about your client species and your enforcement doctrines. We've studied your tactics and your technologies. And we decided we're not interested in what you're selling." Corvin 5 tried to respond. He pulled up his authority as a Concordance admiral and started citing galactic law. He talked about the inevitable integration of all spacefaring species. He explained that resistance was pointless because the Concordance had resources and allies beyond counting. It was the same speech that had worked 40 times before. Brennan cut him off mid-sentence. Just stopped him cold like flipping a switch. The Colossus has 847 primary weapon systems, the human admiral said. Right now, each one is locked onto a different ship in your fleet. We won't fire first. That's not who we are. But if you try to enforce your compliance protocols, if you attempt to bring Earth under Concordance authority by force, you're going to discover exactly why humanity doesn't need your protection. The threat hung in the air. Corvin, 5, looked at his tactical officer, who was frantically checking their defensive systems. The officer's face had gone pale. He nodded slowly. The humans weren't bluffing. Every ship in the Concordance fleet was targeted with enough firepower to vaporize it instantly. Then Brennan did something unexpected. He smiled. Not a friendly smile exactly, but not entirely hostile either. It was a kind of smile that said he held all the cards and everyone knew it. However, he continued, we're not unreasonable people. Earth is willing to establish an embassy with the Concordance. We'll participate in your trade networks. We might even share some technology, the stuff you're ready for. But Earth remains sovereign, independent. We make our own decisions. He leaned forward slightly, and his expression hardened. The Colossus is going to make one patrol through Concordance space. She's going to visit your major systems and let everyone get a good look at her. Consider it a demonstration of intent. We want the entire galaxy to understand Earth's position. We're not asking for permission. We're informing you of what's going to happen. Corvin, 5, felt his pride warring with his survival instincts. Everything in his military training told him to reject this ultimatum. The Concordance didn't negotiate with primitive species. They set the terms. But his sensors were still screaming warnings about the Colossus. His weapons officer had just informed him that their best estimates suggested they'd need to sacrifice at least 60 ships just to damage the human vessel. And even then, victory wasn't guaranteed. The Concordance Council had given him authority to use force if necessary. But they'd also told him to assess the actual threat level and act accordingly. Well, he'd assessed it. The threat level was catastrophic. Going to war with humanity right now would be suicide for his fleet and potentially disastrous for the Concordance. He made his decision. We will relay your terms to the Council. Corvin, 5, said stiffly. And we will accommodate the Colossus patrol through our space. Brennan nodded once. Smart choice, Admiral. We'll be in touch to coordinate the route. Then his image vanished, and the Concordance crews were left staring at their screens. The Council back on the Valkyrie homeworld received Corvin 5's report an hour later. They had 2 options laid out clearly in front of them. Accept humanity's terms and recognize Earth as a sovereign equal despite their recent arrival to the galactic stage. Or go to war with a species that had somehow leapfrogged 10,000 years of normal technological development and build a weapon that could potentially devastate Concordance military forces. The debate lasted 3 days. In the end, pragmatism won over pride. The Concordance would accept Earth's terms. They would maintain diplomatic relations. They would not attempt forced integration. The vote passed by the narrowest margin in Concordance history. Humanity had just changed the rules of the entire galaxy, and they'd done it without firing a single shot. The Colossus began its journey through Concordance space exactly 1 week after the Council's decision. It didn't travel alone. 50 human frigates accompanied the massive dreadnought, forming an escort that looked impressive until you remembered they were protecting something that probably didn't need protection. Each of those frigates was more advanced than most Concordance military vessels, which said something disturbing about how far humanity had come in such a short time. Every species in the galaxy watched. News networks broadcast live feeds of the human fleet as it crossed through different territories. Scientists scrambled to scan the Colossus from safe distances, try to understand how it worked. Military analysts ran simulations trying to figure out how to fight it if they ever needed to. The answer kept coming back the same way. You didn't fight the Colossus. You just hoped it stayed friendly. The ship moved through space at speeds that defied conventional understanding. Something that massive shouldn't be able to accelerate so quickly or maneuver so precisely. Its drives left trails of exotic particles that Concordant scientists had never seen before. Research teams followed behind the human fleet, collecting samples and running tests, hoping to learn something useful. Most of them came away more confused than when they started. At the border of the VRYNN Collective, a young fleet commander named SYX made a decision that would define his career, though not in the way he hoped. SYX was ambitious and proud. He'd risen through the ranks quickly and commanded a battle group of 80 warships. When he heard the Colossus was approaching VRYNN space, he saw an opportunity to make a name for himself. The VRYNN were known for being aggressive. They respected strength and despised what they saw as weakness. SYX figured that if he could force the humans to back down, even just a little, he'd become a hero, maybe even earn a promotion. So when the Colossus entered his patrol zone, he ordered his entire battle group to surround it. 80 VRYNN warships moved into attack positions around the human fleet. SYX opened a channel and demanded that the Colossus submit to a full inspection. He wanted to board the ship, examine its weapons, and show the humans that VRYNN space wasn't somewhere they could just cruise through without consequences. His officers looked nervous, but they followed orders. SYX was convinced the humans would negotiate once they saw they were outnumbered. The Colossus didn't slow down. It didn't even acknowledge the VRYNN fleet at first. It just kept moving forward at the same steady pace, like the 80 warships surrounding it were nothing more than space to breed and navigate around. SYX felt his anger rising. How dare they ignore him? He ordered his ships to arm weapons and prepare to fire warning shots. That's when the Colossus responded. Its point defense grid activated so fast that VRYNN sensors barely registered a happening. Thousands of precision weapons suddenly came online across the ship's hull. Each one locked onto targets with terrifying accuracy. Every VRYNN missile was tracked. Every fighter craft was painted. Every targeting laser was identified and countered. The Colossus's defensive systems were watching everything at once, calculating threats and solutions faster than biological minds could process. Then it fired a single shot. Just one. A beam of concentrated particles lanced out from the Colossus and struck an empty moon on the far side of the system. The moon, which had orbited a gas giant peacefully for billions of years, simply ceased to exist. It didn't explode dramatically like in the movies. It was there one moment, and then it was just a rapidly expanding cloud of glowing debris the next. Vaporized. Gone. The communication from the Colossus was delivered by its AI, and the voice was cold and precise. That was 0.003% of the Colossus's primary weapon array. You have 30 seconds to withdraw before we demonstrate 0.006%. SYX's face went from angry red to pale gray in about 2 seconds. His tactical officer was already calculating what 0.006% would do to their fleet. The numbers weren't good. They weren't even close to good. Every ship they had would be destroyed, and the Colossus would barely notice the effort. The VRYNN fleet scattered like fish spotting a shark. Ships peeled away in every direction, emergency thrusters burning hot as they fled to minimum safe distance. SYX's military career was effectively over, though at least he was alive. The news of what happened spread through the galaxy faster than light-speed communication should allow. The message was clear. Don't challenge the human ship. Don't threaten it. Don't even look at it wrong. Species that had dominated the galaxy for thousands of years suddenly felt very small and very vulnerable. The Concordants had maintained peace largely through the threat of overwhelming force. Now there was a new force in the galaxy, and it belonged to the newcomers from Earth. The Colossus continued its patrol, visiting system after system. At each stop, local governments sent observers to examine the ship from a respectful distance. Military commanders studied it and updated their tactical databases. Scientists wrote papers about it, and everyone came to the same conclusion. Humanity had changed everything. Reports flooded into the Concordance Council from every sector. The humans possessed technology they shouldn't have. Their strategies violated conventional tactical doctrine. Their artificial intelligence was integrated into the Colossus so seamlessly that it could hold diplomatic conversations while simultaneously managing millions of combat calculations. The ship wasn't just advanced. It represented a completely different approach to warfare and engineering. The most disturbing discovery came 3 months into patrol. A Valkyrie intelligence agent, working deep undercover, managed to hack into a human data relay. What he found made the Council's blood run cold. The Colossus wasn't unique. It wasn't even special by human standards. It was the first of a planned fleet of 12 identical vessels. 12 ships, each capable of standing against an entire Concordance battle fleet. Humanity wasn't just announcing their presence on the galactic stage. They were establishing themselves as a superpower that could stand alone against the entire Concordance if necessary. They looked at thousands of years of established power structures and decided they didn't like the rules, so they'd written new ones. The galaxy was changing, and Earth had just forced everyone to acknowledge it. 3 months after the Colossus began its patrol, Ambassador Thelvor finally got the answer to the question that had been eating at him since his first visit to Earth. How? How had humanity done the impossible? How had they compressed centuries of technological development into just a few decades? The question haunted every species in the Concordance, but nobody could figure it out. The answer came during a private dinner aboard a human orbital station. Director Kelly Grant, the same woman who'd given him that first tour of the lunar facilities, had invited him for what she called an informal discussion. No diplomats, no recording devices, just 2 people talking over food and wine. Thelvor's species didn't drink alcohol, but he appreciated the gesture. They made small talk for a while. Grant asked about his homeworld. He asked about Earth's oceans, which fascinated him since his planet had very little surface water. They discussed art and music, and the strange ways different species saw the universe. It was pleasant, almost friendly. Then Grant refilled her wine glass and got the real reason she'd invited him. "You've been watching us for 3 years," she said, swirling the dark red liquid in her glass. "That's what your official reports say, right? 3 years of observation before you made contact." She smiled, and Thelvor felt his sensory tendrils twitch nervously. "We've been watching you for 15 years. Your subtle observation satellites? They weren't subtle at all. We spotted the first one 6 months after you put in orbit." Thelvor felt like he'd been punched. 15 years? That meant humanity had known about the Concordance long before they were supposed to, long before they developed the technology to detect stealth satellites. His mind raced through the implications. Grant continued, her voice calm but intense. "When we discovered we weren't alone in the universe, it was both exciting and terrifying. We spent months just watching your satellites, trying to figure out what you were doing. Then we hacked into them and accessed your databases. We learned about the Concordance, about your 47,000 species, about your protocols for integrating new civilizations." She paused and looked out the station window at the stars beyond. "We face a choice. We could keep developing at our normal pace, let you make first contact when you were ready, and then join your Concordance as a junior member. Follow your rules. Accept your oversight. Become just another species in your collection. Or," she turned back to Thelvor, and her eyes were hard, "or we could become something you couldn't ignore." That's when Thelvor understood. The Colossus, the advanced technology, the military strength, all of it had been deliberate. Humanity hadn't accidentally stumbled into becoming a galactic power. They'd planned it. They'd worked toward it with singular focus and determination. "We did something no other species has ever attempted," Grant said. "We compressed centuries of development into decades. When we learned about the Concordance, we showed our world leaders the truth. Earth wasn't divided anymore. Not really. We had a common cause. We unified our planet faster than anyone thought possible, all because we knew you were out there watching us." She explained how it had worked. Every resource, every brilliant mind, every breakthrough was directed toward one goal, making humanity strong enough that the Concordance couldn't force them into submission. They'd studied human history, for examples. The Manhattan Project, where scientists had built atomic weapons in just a few years. The Apollo program, where engineers had put humans on the moon in less than a decade. Humanity had done it before on smaller scales. The Colossus initiative was just the same principle applied to an entire planet. We nearly bankrupted ourselves, Grant admitted, and for the first time Thelvor heard something like uncertainty in her voice. Half of Earth was building the Colossus and the military fleet. The other half was keeping civilization running, making sure people had food and power and medicine. We gambled everything on a theory. The theory that if we appeared strong enough, we wouldn't actually have to fight. Thelvor thought about the Concordance's history. They'd lasted for thousands of years because they were the strongest power in the galaxy. Species joined them because refusing meant conflict, and conflict with the Concordance was suicide. But they'd grown comfortable in that position. Complacent, even, they'd stopped expecting challenges because challenges never came. Your Concordance has never faced a species like us, Grant said. You've dealt with aggressive species, sure. Warrior cultures, territorial empires. But they all developed naturally. They followed the normal progression. Slow advancement over thousands of years. You've never encountered a species desperate enough to match you and crazy enough to actually try. And that was the truth of it. Humanity had been shaped by competition and warfare and survival on a planet that had tried to kill them for hundreds of thousands of years. They'd evolved in an environment where being second best meant extinction. When they'd looked at the galaxy's power structure, they hadn't seen an inevitable destiny. They'd seen a challenge. We're not conquerors, Grant said quietly. We don't want to rule the galaxy or destroy the Concordance. We just want to be free. Free to make our own choices. Free to develop at our own pace. Free to say no when someone tells us how to live. She met Thelvor's eyes directly. That's worth any price. That's worth risking everything. The Colossus completed its patrol 2 weeks later and returned to lunar orbit. The Concordance Council held a formal ceremony recognizing Earth as a sovereign power with full diplomatic status. Trade agreements were signed. Defense treaties were drafted. Cultural exchange programs were established. On paper, everything looked peaceful and proper. But everyone knew the truth. The balance of power had shifted. 12 more construction bays had broken ground on Luna, Mars, and Europa. Within 5 years, humanity would have a fleet of Colossus-class dreadnoughts. Within 10 years, they'd be the strongest single military force in known space. The galaxy had expected humanity to follow the established path, to be discovered, to be integrated, to become just another member species taking orders from older, wiser civilizations. Instead, the Colossus had carved a new path entirely, and humanity had dared the entire galaxy to try and stop them. Nobody had taken that dare. And now, everyone had to live with the consequences of humanity's audacity.